Reading from the Srimad-Bhagavatam, Canto 6, Chapter 17, Text 20. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
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 Pravaha etasmin.
Pravaha etasmin.
Kashapakom vanugraha. Kashapakom vanugraha. Kaswaganaraka kova. Kaswaganaraka kova. Kim sukam dukam evava. Kim sukam dukam evava.
Guna pravaha etasmin. Guna pravaha etasmin. Kashapakon vanugraha. Kaswargo naraka kova. Kaswargo naraka kova. Kim sukam dukam evava. Kim sukam dukam evava.
Guna pravaha etasmin.
Guna pravaha etasmin.
Kakshapako nurvanugraha.
Kashapakon vanugraha.
Kasvargo narakakova.
Kaswargo naraka kova.
Kim sukam dukam eva.
Kim sukam dukam evava.
Any ladies chant?
Guna
pravaha etasmin. Kashapakon vanugraha. Kasvargo naraka kova. Kim sukam dukam evava.
Guna pravahe. In the current of the modes of nature.
In the current of the modes of nature.
Etasmin.
Etasmin.
This.
This.
Ka. What?
What?
Shapa. A curse.
A curse.
Ka. What?
What?
Nu. Indeed.
Indeed.
Anugraha.
Anugraha.
A favor.
A favor.
Ka. What?
What?
Swaga.
Swaga.
Elevation to heavenly planets.
Elevation to heavenly planets.
Naraka.
Naraka.
Hell.
Hell.
Ka. What?
What?
Va. Or. Kim. What?
What?
Sukam. Happiness. Dukam. Distress. Eva. Indeed. Va. Or. Translation. This material world resembles the waves of a constant flowing river. Therefore, what is a curse and what is a favor? What are the heavenly planets and what are the hellish planets? What is actually happiness and what is actually distress? Because the waves flow constantly, none of them has an eternal effect. Purport. Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur sings, Miche, Mayara Vasi, Yache Beshe, Kachi, Habu Dubu Bhai. My dear living entities within this material world, what are you being carried away why are you being carried away by the waves of the modes of material nature? Jiva, Krishna Das, Avishvas, Karleta, Ada Dukanai. The living entity tries to understand that he's an eternal servant of Krishna. There will no longer be misery for him. Krishna wants us to give up all other engagements and surrender unto him. If we do so, where will the cause and effect of this material world be? There is nothing like the cause and effect for the surrendered soul. Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur says in this regard that being put into this material world is like being thrown into a mine of salt. If one falls into a mine of salt, he tastes only salt wherever he goes. Similarly, this material world is full of miseries. The so-called temporary happiness of the world is also misery. But in ignorance, we cannot understand that. That is the actual position. When one comes to his senses, when he becomes Krishna conscious, he is no longer concerned with the various conditions of this material world. He's not in concern with happiness or distress, curses or favors or heavenly hellish planets. He sees no distinction between them. What's going on in the kitchen? It's just, can they do that some other time? Okay. Om Jnana Timirandasya Gananjana Shalakaya Chaksurunmulatam Yena Tasmai Sri Gurave Namaha Sri Chaitanya Manopishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Sayam Bhuvakatamayam Dadati Sapadantikam Vanchakalpa Tarubhyascha Kripa Sindhu Bhayevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namah Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasade Gaur Bhaktavinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So this is the part of the Bhagavatam where Chitraketu had just got cursed. And his reaction is exemplary because he doesn't take offense and he doesn't ultimately see it as a curse. Just like Maharaj Pricket, when Maharaj Pricket got cursed by the Brahmin boy, his reaction was so nice. He said, Sadhu Mene, I think this is good. He said, because I will free myself from the reaction to the offense. I'll become detached from the world. And the reaction to the curse won't linger on in a Hatfield McCoy sense to my family. You all know the Hatfields and McCoys? No? You don't know. Hatfields and McCoys is in West Virginia. It was a conflict between hillbilly groups that were killing each other for 20 generations or something. It just kept on going on. That's called the Hatfields and McCoys. So it wouldn't go on. So this analogy is really very good. And the analogy is like a river. It's just moving and constantly passing. And you don't pay much attention to it. Because whatever happens will change. I remember one time Gaur Govinda Swami gave advice. Some conflict came to him and he gave like some real spiritual perspective, you know. One who is fortunate will be unfortunate. One who is unfortunate will be fortunate. You know, it all changes. So, Sadhu Mene, and it changes and it's moving in a good way on the absolute platform. this was also, it's one of my favorite parts in the Bhagavatam, where Maharaj Yudhisthira can't understand why he's suffering so much, even though he's so good. And therefore he goes to Bhishma Deva on the battlefield, and of course it's such a dramatic scene. A bed of arrows. You know what a bed of arrows is? It's when your body is shot completely through with arrows and you fall down. You have a nice bed of arrows. And he explains to him, you have to understand three things. Actually, in the Yoga Sutras it says, because it describes the law of karma, that what is established at the time, your birth is established, your death is established, and your experiences are established at the time of your birth. And what are the experiences? It's happiness and distress. And then in the next verse he wants to say, but actually all is distress. This is called, in the Buddhist terms, it's called sarva dukkha. All is distress. Jagat and myself have this transcendental, slight difference. He loves these absolute statements. There's no love in the material world. All is suffering. And I try to temper it a little bit. And remember, there's no love in the material world. With a big L, there's no love. There's no ultimate bhakti. But I don't know. Here, I think I'm gonna agree with him. Sarva dukkha, all is suffering. All is suffering. On one platform, all is suffering. All is suffering. I came up with an acronym. HUT. Hankering, unfulfilling, and temporary. Hankering, unfulfilling, and temporary. You start with temporary. All is suffering. Can you enjoy in America, when they execute someone, they let him have his last meal. Can you enjoy your last meal? No, because you can't enjoy your last meal because you see what the end is. You see what the end is. And sometimes we pay more attention to what the end is than what's happening now. What will be the result of something? That's why a devotee is so exalted, because by accepting Krishna, regardless where he is, we see what the result is. He'll be accepted by Krishna. So things are temporary. So it puts a damp into any pleasure that we have, because it's temporary. And therefore, there's duality, because what we have, we're going to lose. And it's always mixed with what you do. So I know one time here, there was a famous yogic scholar called A.G. Mohan. And somehow Kastuba Prabhu was responsible for caring for him. He was in one of Adi's apartments or something. And then we took him to a program, and he was lecturing on the Yoga Sutras. And the way he began was brilliant. He said, I don't know if he called it, later I called it a happiness test. If something is going to be happy, it has to have three categories. Well, first of all, he said, have you found what you're looking for? So, yeah, okay, yes. And the second question is it eternal? Because if it's not eternal, you're looking for the wrong thing. Because what you're investing in, you're going to lose. And therefore, there's two qualities of suffering that are invested in it. One, that the pain when you lose it, and the expectation that you will. So things that are temporary, we have to question if they also can be happiness, ultimate happiness. Of course, I always make the disqualification that there is a certain level of satisfaction in the material world that we strive for, but not for ultimate happiness, to achieve ultimate happiness. And I remember Borijan Prabhu on this commentary on a verse said, yes, we don't live to enjoy, we enjoy to live. We don't live to eat, we eat to live, but for what purpose? So we're not denying that people should try to find some type of satisfaction in life, and there's some validity in that. That we try to be healthy, we try to have good relationships. We try to have proper occupation. The whole Varnashram system is for that purpose. Even Bhaktivinoda Thakur was one asked, what is the relationship between Varnashram and Bhakti? He said, what Varnashram, which means proper social and economic situation, it promotes physical, mental, and social peace. Physical peace, you have to work, and it's good if you work according to your nature. It's a healthy situation, you'll be economically reciprocated, you'll be taken care of. When people actually train to have value in society, then their value will be achieved. And mental peace, when someone is engaged and situated properly, they're peaceful. And social peace. We can see, even in any social structure, I look sometimes and analyze ISKCON, you know, a place is not going to be happy unless it has an economic base, good management, and spiritual leadership. And sometimes it's hard to find all three in one place. And if you don't have all three, it's not going to be a peaceful place. You got to have the Bhagavatam, you have the spiritual aspect, that has to be strong. You have to have good management, you have to have an economic base. But he said without mental, physical, and social peace, what is the question of the higher endeavor? What is the question of the higher endeavor of spiritual life? In a societal sense, individually sometimes people can transcend. But any social organization, these things are needed. But not as the goal. If you analyze it as the goal, then all is suffering. Because it's temporary. When you have pleasure in this world, it creates samskaras. And then you're hankering. And satisfaction is contentment. Happiness is contentment. You're satisfied with what you have. So when there's just pleasure without the proper regulation, certainly without the, then it just disturbs the mind. And we're just hankering more. This is the principle against bhakti called atyahara. Atyahara comes from two words. Atihara. Hara is eating. Ati means extreme eating. It's the anamoya, the first consciousness of the material world is self-preservation or food. It's a template for what material life is, basically. So atyahara doesn't mean just extreme eating, it just means to extreme desire, hankering. And what happens? If you start to have desires and try to fulfill desires beyond your needs, then a dynamic is set. Because you'll develop an attachment that will impel you to want more, and it's a never-ending cycle. You have to satisfy your needs. We have to have societies and families as much as possible to satisfy the needs. But when you have I think Erich Fromm, a famous German social philosopher, described two types of freedom, freedom to and freedom from want. And we don't enough adhere to the understanding of freedom from want. Freedom too, so we can do anything and increase our desires endlessly. So proper society is like contentment. You know, enough. Because if you start taking more, there'll be an endless cycle. And those desires themselves are suffering. So, and then, so there's temporary, there's hankering, and unfulfilled. Because ultimately, happiness is not how the world moves around you ultimately. Happiness is how you respond to it. Happiness is your consciousness, not things. If you have a society where you base your pleasure on things, you're going to be miserable. Because the more you place your happiness in things, your goal or your objective becomes things. Then the more you become disconnected from the self. I read in a book, I forgot, a nice statement that happiness doesn't come to the self, happiness radiates from the self. It's consciousness. It's consciousness, and ultimately that consciousness is love and devotion, and ultimately it's an energy of Krishna, which is the real happiness. And this is what people who come to bhakti experience, and why they have faith in bhakti. The reason they have faith in bhakti is because they have shraddha. And I read in this commentary of the Manasiksha by Bhakti Vigyan Goswami, and he defined this word shraddha. The word shraddha means to know. So faith means not just something theoretical, but you know. And when you come to bhakti, what do you know? That this is the highest happiness. That there's some real happiness. Not just some mental conception. We're number one. We're number one. You know, you win the World Cup, the Super Bowl, the ecstasy. It's not real. It's a mental conception. There's that term, mano rite dasati bhavato mati, that there's something that goes on the mental plane. It's not real. It's kind of like, I would describe the happiness as like in India, when you drive down the highway and then you go through an old movie theater in some kind of town, and they have this incredible, beautiful starlight, and then you have this superhero, and then you see all these like hundreds of bikes before the theater with these little tiffins, and you know that these skinny, undernourished village Indians are at that movie. And they'll never get that girl. And they'll never be that superhero. But they'll have a conception of it. So it's not real. So material happiness is something like that. That's not real. That's not us. And therefore you have very interesting phenomena. I always quote this study, and it really startled me, this study. I think I told this before, because I was once doing a seminar on happiness, so I was studying really what this is. And then there's this person who was doing these studies on happiness. It's very interesting, there's several studies. One study was by, this is just on a pure psychological platform. There's a study that was done by Harvard University that's a remarkable study, because in that particular study, they were able to follow people who were 20 years old at the time. It must have been in 1940 or something they started the study. They were 20 years old at the time. And they followed these people to the fact now there's only maybe 20 or 30 of them left in their 90s. And then I think after 30 years in the study, they added women. So they were analyzing, you know, even what makes someone physically healthy. Let's go study what makes someone physically healthy. and would go back to their thing. And surprising enough, you know, someone's healthy. Now let's look at their life. What is the factor, the key factor in their life that we can isolate that was related to health more than anything else? Diet was not number one. Exercise was not number one. It was the amount of healthy relationships they had. So there's something. Yeah, they say love makes the world go round. Our ultimate conception is rasa vai saha. The ultimate reality is love. There's something. That's the real happiness. And that real happiness is the energy of Krishna. That's real happiness. The essence of Ladini praying is of the pleasure potency. The essence of the Ladini Shakti is Krishna praying. When Krishna praying is heightened to the highest degree, it's Mahabhav. And Radha is Mahabhav Sarup. She's the form of that. She's the Purna Shakti. There's an energy. There's an energy of happiness. And it's not just a mental thing. And it's not just things. So they did this study. And what's the study? There's another study done. Paraplegics, people who broke their necks and couldn't move their arms and legs. And then there's another group that won the lottery. Let's follow them for 5 years and give them tests of happiness. And sure enough, at the very beginning, there was a great divergence of who is happy, because when your conception of happiness is material, which means you want to enjoy, which you require control, and control you require power. So when you lose power, you are miserable. And when you get power, you're temporarily happy. So you're paraplegic, you've lost power, you can't control the world. It's going to be harder to have sex life, it's going to be harder to have career, it's going to be harder to have money. I am miserable. And the people who win the lottery, they're ecstatic. Why? I have power. Money is power. I can now control the world, I can have better sex life, now I have money, money is power, I can get. But after 5 years, no difference. And why is there no difference? Because it's all mental. And real happiness is something else. Real happiness is within. So what I would psychologically analyze that would happen is the people who are quadriplegics, by that situation, they're forced to find their happiness not in the world, but how they react to it. There's more of a tendency. And that's what suffering does. That's what difficulty does. And that's why God gives us challenges. Because He wants us to move and find the real happiness within. And then the people who were won the lottery, what happens? Contentment. Their attachments increase. So their desires increase. And it never ends. So they're left with the same situation they began with. A sense of lack. I want this. I want this. And also, it disconnects them from the soul. So at the end, it kind of evened out. I mean, it's not fun. So we say in New York, it's no joke. Paraplegic, they're there, and then, but after 5 years, no difference. Because it's consciousness that's happiness. And I thought of this too, that, you know, the strongest argument against the existence of God is the existence of evil. And I thought a way to deal with that argument is look at things from the perspective of God and His view of what happiness is. So God wants to give you happiness. And what's happiness? It's love and devotion. And what's our conception of happiness? It's things. It's power to get those things. And we're all challenged by that, even now. And we know it. We have that faith, saying, Shraddha, to know. But what do we really know and why we are in devotional service? Because we had a spiritual experience. We had an experience. Shraddha means to know. And what do we know? We know that drop of God's internal potency that somehow touched our hearts by the mercy of a devotee. And somehow or other convinced us that that's the goal of life. Brahmanda Brahmate, Konya Bhagavan Jeev, Guru Krishna Pasadi Pai, Bhakti Lata Bij. We're wandering the universe from species of life to species, until by the mercy of Guru Krishna we get the Bhakti Lata Bij. What is that? We know. We know that there's something higher than the senses. There's something higher than the ego. There's a spiritual pleasure that we will dedicate our lives for, despite all the trouble that we have to undergo once we enter that process. That's why in the Upadeshamrita it says one of the qualities for favorable for bhakti, utsahan nishtayadharya, it's this faith or confidence that this goal, this happiness, is so worth it that any trouble I am undergoing on the path to get that is a little price to pay. In the Bhakti immersion, we had this great drama about Mukunda, who, he had bad association. Lord Chaitanya rejected him. And the devotees, their hearts were bleeding. Please see Mukunda, see please Mukunda. He said, I will not see him for a million births. No, Mukunda said, just ask the Lord, when will I see him? I will not see that rascal for a million births. And what was Mukunda's response? I will. And Lord was so pleased. Why? Because that is faith. That is faith. That's to know. He knew that type of happiness, that type of connection with God is so valuable that whatever difficulties I undergo on the process is a small price to pay. And when you understand that, then maybe you can understand why there's difficulties in the world, and that doesn't contradict God, who must be omnipotent, all-powerful, omniscient, know everything, and omnibenevolent, all good. Because he's looking. And we're saying, why are you doing this to me? I want to be happy. Why didn't you give me this big thing? And why have you taken away this thing from me? And why you've done this thing to me? Aren't you kind, God? Why you put me so much trouble? But what's God's perspective? I want to give you this. I want to give you the soul. And it's worth the price. I'm giving you a bargain. I'm giving you a bargain because what I am giving you. I'm giving you myself. I'm giving you the connection to myself. And once you feel that, that's the goal of life. What is the prayojana? What is the goal of life according to the Gaudiya Vaishnava philosophy? What is the prayojana? The prayojana is to not only know the truth, but to feel the truth. Because we have a relationship with the truth. And the manifestation of relationship is prema or love. So our prayojana is to feel the truth. And that's so good. So all this other stuff, this temporary, the world moving this way or that way, it's for our benefit. And therefore one who is, again, Bhishma Dev's instruction. Okay, things are happening to you, they're good. God is absolute. Respond to them in the proper way. That's called Dharma. And make sure you do it properly. Get the guidance of the Vaishnavas and Brahmins. If you do that, all your experiences are beyond duality. Because all your experiences are to give you that fruit of realization that's worth any of the difficulties that you undergo. So, Chichiketu is the example of the person who inherits the kingdom of God because of that faith. Tatenu kampam susamikshmano. It's worth it. And when it happens, you bow your head again and again. Because that type of faith, it gives you God. Okay, there's a few minutes. Anybody have any questions? Yeah.
Mark, you mentioned Varnashram Dharma, and you mentioned Bhaktivinoda Thakur.
Yeah.
That it's very important for social contentment. And
Yeah.
that gives a solid foundation to.
Yeah.
So Srila Prabhupada also encouraged Varnashram Dharma. And I see kind of almost two factions in our society. One is saying like you even get like petitions. If we don't do this, then we're deviants. If we don't establish Varnashram,
Yeah.
and then you have those who say, well, you know, it's just a support system. Bhakti is the real thing, and it's just the West is like we're so far removed from any kind of Varnashram.
Yeah. I got the question. Borijan basically asked Prabhupada the same thing. And he basically said, what's the difference between a detail and a principle? You know, for example, it's a principle that you should worship Guru. That you have Guru every day is a detail. They don't have that in other Vaishnava lines, actually. They don't have that in the Gaudiya Math. That's a detail. So there's principles and there's details. So how do you know the difference? There's Varnashram. It's a principle that society should be socially organized. Now, how do you know how to do it? So Borijan said, what's the difference? How can you understand the difference between a principle and a detail? Prabhupada said, it takes intelligence. So really it takes realization. Because what realization means is a depth of understanding something that you can apply it in different circumstances and perhaps reform it. Keep the same principle, right? But then you have to reform it according to the culture. Now, I'm not taking a side right here, obviously in 1.5 minutes. But there's a tension, and you'll find that tension everywhere. It should be a healthy tension. It shouldn't be a war, because there are truths that coming from